study. We are still in the process of working through the songs of the ascents from the Psalms. And we're kind of in the last part of that now, kind of in the last third of that. We have a few more to go, but we are working through that process. And as we have every week, I want to kind of open the same way, except a little bit of a twist this week. I'm going to read the Psalm 4 times, actually, this time, because I specifically want to get to a contrast that I think is necessary when we're dealing with this Psalm. So, again, as I read it the first time, I just want you to listen. No response. You're not listening for anything in particular. Just kind of want you to listen to what the Psalm is saying. Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we can with reverence worship you. I wait for the Lord. My whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. More than watchmen wait for the morning. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins. Okay, so as I read it again, I encourage you just let a word, a phrase pop out, something that feels significant to you. Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we can with reverence worship you. I wait for the Lord. My whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning, more than watchmen wait for the morning. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins. Take a moment with the folks you're seated with, and just if there's a word or phrase that kind of popped out to you, share that around your tables. Talk about that for just a minute, and maybe we'll ask you to share anything you'd like.
What chapter did you say?
130. So as you listen, is there a word or a phrase that just kind of popped out for you that was important to you as you listened?
I know he's hurting.
Hope and forgiveness. What, Mark?
He's hurting.
He's hurting.
Yeah, hurting.
Sounds like he's
We
hurting.
gotta wait on God.
Okay.
For hope.
Okay.
Mercy.
Mercy. Out of the depths. Okay, listen one more time. And this time I want you to listen specifically for echoes of hope. How do you hear this psalm speaking to hope? Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we can with reverence worship you. I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord, more than watchmen wait for the morning. More than watchmen wait for the morning. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins. There's actually an echo in there. So talk about that for a minute around your tables. What echoes of hope do you hear? What resonance do you hear of hope in that song?
He says,
So what echoes of hope do you hear there? What speaks to hope in this song?
Because God's love is unfailing.
God's love is unfailing.
He knows He will give forgiveness and
Okay.
redemption,
Psalmist expects forgiveness and mercy.
confidence, acceptance.
Acceptance,
full redemption.
full redemption. Interesting phrase.
Imagery of the watchman and just being out in the night and just knowing that the morning's coming.
Yeah.
And just are hoping for that.
Yeah, that image of the watchman, we're going to come back to that, unpack that a little bit more.
And my question was, the watchman talking about the end of this, but he's probably super excited when he's going to sleep.
Morning's coming, so he can, when the sun comes up, he can go to bed. Yeah. He's the night watchman. Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
You won't make you cry if you don't expect anybody to hear.
Say that one more time, Moses.
I say you won't cry if you don't expect anyone to hear.
You won't cry if you don't expect anyone to hear you. Okay?
Trust firmly placed in his promises.
Trust firmly placed in his promises. Nehemiah?
In his word I put my hope,
In his word I put my hope.
in his promises.
In his promises. Okay, tuck that away. We're going to come back to it. We're going to need it in a minute. Because I want to look at the psalm slightly differently. I want to use Peterson's translation from A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, our kind of companion book we're using. And I want you to listen to what it has to say or what you hear about suffering. Here's what he says. Help, God. The bottom has fallen out of my life. Master, hear my cry for help. Listen hard. Open your ears. Listen to my cries for mercy. If you, God, kept records on wrongdoings, who could stand a chance? As it turns out, forgiveness is your habit, and that's why you're worshiped. I pray to God, my life a prayer, and wait for what He'll say and do. My life's on the line before God, my Lord, waiting and watching till morning. Waiting and watching till morning. O Israel, wait and watch for God. With God's arrival comes love. With God's arrival comes generous redemption. No doubt about it, He'll redeem Israel, buy back Israel from captivity to sin. Talk for a moment about what you heard there about suffering, descriptions of or echoes of suffering in that psalm as Peterson translated it. Talk about that for just a minute. Read the very beginning of it again. Holy God, the bottom has fallen out of my life. Master, hear my cry for help. Listen hard. Open your ears. Listen to my cries for mercy. So what do you hear there about suffering? Either as that describes it or that speaks to it in some way to you? What do you hear there? The bottom has fallen out of my life. Isn't that an incredible description of what happens? Others? Nothing's going right. Desperation.
And it seems like it's been ongoing because it's this, please listen, please open your ears. Like, been telling you.
This is not new. This is ongoing. Please listen. Okay? My life is on the line. What do I think it means? I don't know. What do you think it means? This is a collaborative operation here. Somebody back here, sorry.
Watching kind of indicates he feels separated from God, and that's.
Sense of separation there. Yeah, okay.
But if he's watching, there's hope.
But if he's watching, there's hope. We're going to get the hope, but I won't get the hope too fast.
Okay.
No, and I hear what you're saying. I think, because Peterson says this is a psalm of hope. I think it is a psalm of hope. But before we get to talking about the hope, I want to spend a little time talking about the suffering. Here's how Peterson describes it in his book. To be human is to be in trouble. Job's anguish is our epigraph. Man is born to trouble as sparks fly upward. Suffering is a characteristic of the personal. Animals can be hurt, but they do not suffer. The earth can be ravaged, yet it cannot suffer. Man and woman alone in creation suffer. For suffering is pain plus physical or emotional pain, plus the awareness that our own worth as people is threatened, that our own value as creatures made in the dignity of God is called into question, that our own destiny as eternal souls is jeopardized. Are we to be finally nothing? Are we to be discarded? Are we to be rejects in the universe and thrown into the garbage dump of humanity because our bodies degenerate, or our emotions malfunction, or our minds become confused, or our families find fault with us, or society avoids us? Any one of these things, or as is more likely, a combination of them, can put us in the state Psalm 130 describes as the bottom has fallen out of my life. Does that resonate with you at all? Have you ever found yourself in a place where all you could do was cry? It's the only response you had because of that sense of desperation? What Peterson hits on here, and I think is really true in this psalm, is what the psalmist, and remember, they're singing this on the way to worship. Interesting context we'll come back to in a moment. There is this sense of desperation, and the desperation is more than, we don't know what the problem is. It doesn't say. We don't know. Sometimes I think when we think of suffering, we think of suffering as, something, a thing. We're suffering something. When in reality, sometimes suffering is the whole thing at that time. That's why that description, the bottom has fallen out of my life, seems so appropriate to me. Because there are things that happen in our life that it just changes. Life is different. From that moment forward, life is no longer what it was before. Whatever it is, an event, a conversation, a diagnosis, all of those things, and life is forever different. And I think we have a sense that we all share that in our human experience, which is why, Saturday morning we had about 100 people down here who were trying to figure out how to navigate stress and anxiety and transitions and all these things in our lives, because we know this is part of the human condition. So what's the significance of, back to, here are pilgrims on the way to worship singing songs that got recorded because they were sung time and time and time and time and time and time and time again, to where they finally said, we need to write these down, and we have them. What's the significance of somebody singing about their suffering on their way? Why does that matter? Why is that important? To encourage? How, Will?
I think it's easiest when somebody's honest, you can feel it, especially pain.
Uh-huh.
You can tell somebody's sincerity, or whether it's making something up to, I think you feel that. Music is a good example of that.
Yeah. There's something about that honesty that's almost self-authenticating, this expression that we hear from the psalmist, okay?
It's it's also like hoping that by the time we get to the mountain, to the hill of God, we'll get some preparation
Yeah.
and some solution.
Yeah, almost, I'm saying this now because that may be why I'm going. I'm hoping that by the time we get to the place of worship, by the time we get to the holy city, there's going to be some resolution. I'm going to have that sense of God's presence. Okay? Peterson says that dealing with suffering in this way in this psalm does a couple things. The first thing, and I want to make sure I say it kind of specifically as he says it, and that's why I'm looking for it, and I should have marked it. I know, but that's not for this. That was for the last thing. And I should have moved it. He says that, here it is, that the psalm gives dignity to our suffering. What do you think that means? That it gives dignity to our suffering. He says that it brings it out into the open.
It's going to resonate with everybody in the group.
It's going to resonate with everybody in the group.
And it's not something to be ashamed of.
It's not something to be ashamed of, but how often are we ashamed of our suffering? And so we say things like, why don't you suffer in silence? Right? And by putting it in this context, in this moment, it says there's something gloriously human about this experience.
Because it affects everyone.
It affects everyone.
Everyone's.
He goes on to say, suffering is set squarely, openly, and passionately before God. It is acknowledged and expressed. It is described and lived. The singer of this song and all who sing it with him or her are bringing their suffering into worship. They're not looking to worship to solve their suffering. They're bringing their suffering with them. And we do that, don't we? We do that all the time. And what the psalmist is saying is, this is what's going on in my life in this moment. Here it is. And so it brings a certain dignity to that suffering. I will tell you that, in 30 years of ministry, this document to me is one of the most fascinating things that I deal with. The prayer list. It's a really fascinating thing. People's relationship to this document is really fascinating. When people want to be on it or they don't want to be on it. Or they, put my name on there, don't you dare put my name on there. Whatever that is. And I don't say that with any judgment whatsoever. I'm saying it's fascinating. Because part of what I can learn in that reaction with somebody is how they feel about what they're going through at the moment. How they're responding and what they think other people will think of them. The psalmist is all over the prayer list. He's like, put me on there at the top, bold, underlined, make sure everybody else knows, and God too. I am unhappy, upset, burdened, troubled. The bottom has fallen out of my life, and I need somebody else to know it, because maybe you'll get God to listen to me, because I don't think God's paying me any attention at all. That's what he's saying. But it puts it out front. That's the lead line in the psalm. That's the first thing. The other thing that Peterson says is that the psalmist, in including it this way, connects our suffering to God's activity in the world. That my suffering is a problem for me, and it's saying in the psalm with absolute confidence, it ought to be a problem for God that I am suffering like this. I expect God to do something. I expect God to hear me. I expect God to listen to me. Maybe you've never had this experience, but I've had a lot of times in my life where I did not think God was listening. It's a real, honest expression of what we deal with. And sometimes the depth of what we call suffering in our lives is not just the physical ailment or the broken relationship or the economic problem or whatever it is. It's what it does to us in our sense of connectedness to other people and to God. It disrupts. One of the first things I learned in seminary about what happens in people's lives when they have traumatic events or when they have illness or whatever is it disrupts all of life. It's not just that one piece. And this acknowledges that. So suffering is real. It's a part of our human existence. And the psalmist expects God to do something. And we know that because 8 times in this psalm, the psalmist uses the name for God. And other times uses a pronoun to point to what the psalmist hopes that God will do. And by name, I mean the name, Yahweh, the one who is. Now, it gets translated Lord because it gets articulated Adonai in the Hebrew, and so it gets translated as Lord. But what's there is the divine name, the one who is. 8 times. So here's what I want you to do. Here's your little table project for a few minutes. Using what this psalmist says about God, finish the sentence, God is. Using what the psalmist says here about God, 8 times uses the name, more times refers to what this person thinks God ought to do or how God ought to respond or what he expects or she expects God to do. Use that. Finish the sentence, God is. God is what?
She has the answer.
You said a lot of things? God is a lot of things? God is hope? Okay?
God is love,
God is love.
forgiving,
God is patient. God is forgiving.
God is in control.
God is what?
In control.
In control.
A
Okay.
responder. Is a responder.
A responder.
Oh, he's always at work.
Always at work.
Merciful.
Merciful.
Listener.
Listener.
Takes his time to act.
Takes his time to act.
Patient.
Patient.
Doesn't keep track of sins.
Doesn't keep track of sins. That's what the psalmist says about God. I think it's fair to say he ain't feeling it. Right? I know, he says. I know. But, which is where the problem is. Because I think if you take, he's like, I know God is real and what I'm going through is real. Suffering is real and God is real and God is all of these things. And that's the problem. And that's been the problem for theologians since the first one tried to think about what was going on. You know, we kind of understand from a scholarly perspective that perhaps the oldest book of Scripture is Job. Why? Because that's the problem. Life is this, and we believe God is this, and what do we do between these two realities? How do we live in the tension of that? That this is what's going on in our life, and we believe this, and so we're saying, hello? Are you listening? Where are you? I believe this about you. The psalmist is making incredible statements of what he or she believes about God. I believe you are all these things, and yet I feel like my life is garbage. And I believe it's both of these things are true. What do we do? What's the bridge? That's where Peterson said the bridge is something called hope. And hope is kind of broken down here in this psalm as waiting and watching. And as Dory pointed out, I will watch and wait. I will watch. It is literally the echo of hope in the song. It's a repeated line. And then in the NIV, and I want to look at this metaphor for a minute because it came up a moment ago. The metaphor the psalmist uses is that of a watchman. Do you have a sense of what a watchman might have done in that day and age? It's not difficult. This is not complicated. A watchman watched. Right? Half a point. Half a point. A watchman watched. A watchman watched the city, watched the neighborhood, watched, to make sure nothing untoward went on, or watched for the potential advance of an enemy, or, people who were in need of help. And yes, they generally watch through the night because everybody's watching in the daytime. So the watchman watches at night. Now think about that metaphor for a moment of what it means for us to be a watchman in this place between suffering is real and God is real and we are watching. What could the watchman control? He could notify somebody. He could raise an alarm. Sure. A little bit like what the psalmist is doing. Hey, there's a problem here.
He can keep his eye.
can keep his eyes open. He cannot turn the earth to make the sun come up any sooner. But he can keep his eyes open, and he can watch and he can wait knowing that the sun will come up. So hope is that thing that happens before the sun comes up. When we're watching and we're waiting. Now, I like what Peterson says here. He says hope is not a couple of things. He says hope does not mean doing nothing. It is not fatalistic resignation. It means going about our assigned task confident that God will provide the meaning and the conclusions. Confident that God will provide the meaning. I think sometimes one of the most challenging things for us when life's going hard is we are looking for some meaning to it all. We're looking for things to make sense. And let's be honest, not everything makes sense. Sometimes we do have to get out of our own way. Be still. Hey, you got that tattoo yet, Will?
Yeah, I do.
But being still, waiting on God, is not sitting down and giving up. And I think that's the difference Peterson's making. It's going on with life. It's continuing to engage in life, confident that if we will watch and wait, God will somehow make meaning of this. Bring it to a conclusion, he says. May not be the conclusion we expect, desire, or that we hoped was coming. We have to be honest about that. Because there's no point lying about it. We've all lived enough life, we know, right? Things don't always work out the way we hope they'll work out. What the psalmist is saying and what is indicating here is that even in those moments, God is at work. You know, it's what Paul says about God being at work in all things. It doesn't mean that God's working all things out. It means that God's at work in all things. And part of waiting and watching is learning how to experience God's presence in the hardest moments of our lives. The other thing he says is hoping is not dreaming. It's not spinning an illusion or fantasy to protect us from our boredom or our pain. It means a confident, alert expectation that God will do what God said God will do. It is imagination put in the harness of faith. It is a willingness to let God do it God's way and in God's time. It's the opposite of demanding from God. It's hoping in God, not bullying God. But it's waiting and watching till morning.
That's good.
I think it's also important to note that hope is not an analgesic. It doesn't necessarily soothe our pain. Hope does not in and of itself necessarily bring peace to a situation. It points to those promises. It points to that hope of wholeness. It points to those things. But in the moment when we're between suffering and God in that place and we're waiting and watching, it doesn't mean that we still don't have to go through whatever we're in the middle of. And that's not easy. It's not an easy place to be at all. Which is why the psalmist is crying out to God in the way that that this psalm reflects. There's a phrase at the end. It's interesting. Another use of Psalm 130 is as a penitential psalm, that it is a psalm of confession and a reminder of God's forgiveness, and certainly that's there. I don't want to leave that out of the conversation at all, but I think those concepts we're a little bit more familiar with, in the idea that there is this trust and hope that God is a forgiving God. Because, as the psalmist says, if God wasn't a forgiving God, nobody has a chance. I like the way Peterson put, look, if you're keeping a list and you're not going to forgive this stuff, nobody has a chance. And so there is that point to it, that there is forgiveness to be had. And I don't want to leave that out, but I also don't want to necessarily connect suffering and forgiveness, because that's problematic in some ways. But I do want to visit this last phrase, full redemption. What's full redemption? Complete forgiveness? What's the difference in that and a little bit of forgiveness, Barbara?
Your sins were wiped away.
Your sins are wiped away.
As far as the east is from the
As
west.
far as the east is from the west, okay?
Is it restoration?
Restoration. Full redemption seems to point more toward restoration. Other thoughts about that? Other ideas about that? What is full redemption?
The prodigal son is returned.
The prodigal son is returned. And not just forgiven, right? Restored. Give him back his place. Not come back and work in the barn. Come back and sleep in the house. Give him his rings. Give him his robes. Restoration.
It's also like that woman who came back after the prophet, and the prophet was introducing him to the king, and the king said everything she has lost in the past 7 years, she'll be given back to her while she was away doing the fight.
So it's that giving back what has been lost. Yeah? Okay. Full redemption. I do think it has something to do with restoration. I do think it has something to do with the idea that not only does God forgives us, does God forgive us, but in that redeeming process, we're not just forgiven and set to the side as clean. We're forgiven, and then that's the beginning of a process of transformation. Changed. That we're moving through this, and it's changing us, and it's transforming us, and we come out of that process as something new and something that is continuing to become. What does that mean? What does full redemption mean in the context of God's work in us in suffering? Remember that fundamental to our theology is the idea that our salvation comes through suffering. That our redemption comes through suffering. When we gather around the communion table, we talk about this is the cup of the new covenant, my blood shed for the remission of your sins. This idea that there is redemption, that suffering can be redeemed into something new, something that is becoming. So this is tricky in application. This is tricky in real world application, what I'm about to say. But I do think while the things we suffer in life are life-changing, life-altering, and often have consequences that last the rest of our lives, and that often contain within those consequences produce grief and loss and all those things for us, that there is something about when God is in the crucible of suffering with us, that suffering can be redeemed into something that changes us and it creates something new in our lives. Now, please understand, I don't offer that as a panacea. I'm not saying that you just see it this way and then, suddenly you're going to feel better if you see this. God's going to redeem this. I've heard that before. God's going to redeem that suffering and everything. I don't want to, it's not that simple. It's not that thin. But can you understand what I'm saying? I think there's something inherently gracious in that. That the things we suffer in life are often simply a reflection of our human condition. And they are the things we are going to suffer because we are mortal creatures. And God knows that, and what God does to enter into that moment with us and to try to redeem that which we have to go through, to me is a very gracious thing. Now, you need to understand, I don't start from the point of view that God is responsible for and causing your suffering. I don't start there. But I start from the point of view that God, who loves us and is gracious and merciful and cares for us, when God sees us in that suffering that comes as a part of the human condition and a part of this life, God says, I'm going to enter into that and make something out of it in you. I'm going to use this in some way. I didn't cause this, but I'm going to use this in some way to make something new for you. Of all the Psalms we looked at, this is the most difficult. Not because it's hard to understand, but because it resonates so deeply with our human experience. Because we've all been here. All of us in some way or another are here with something. And so it's something that we wrestle with. And there aren't easy answers. Except to say, and this is not easy, but I think it's clear, God knows we suffer, and God's love for us compels God to enter into our suffering. Because that's what God does in Jesus. God enters into our suffering. And I think that's what happens even in these moments. And that idea that we somehow lose contact with that work of God is where we have to wait and watch. The waiting and the watching is about training ourselves to pay attention to God's presence in our lives in those moments. And here's the thing. I think we have to train ourselves to see God's presence in our lives every day, the sunny days and the stormy days, so that we see it clearly in those moments where it's hard to see. And that's why daily practices of prayer are so important. We've talked in here at different times about some of those practices, like the prayer of examine. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the prayer of examine. It's an old practice. It's an old Christian way of praying that says at the end of the day, you simply sit in silence and ask God to show you where God was in your day that day. And as you do that day in and day out, you're practicing, as Brother Lawrence said, you're practicing the presence of God. You're learning to see where God is at work. And so when we get to those harder moments in life, we at least know where to look. We know what to look for in those moments. So something to think about. All right? Any other thoughts? Any other responses? Terry?
Long suffering. I think it's noteworthy in the last century, the gentleman who was considered the father of clinical pastoral education, a man by the name of Antoine Boyce, struggled with severe mental illness, and he titled his autobiography Out of the Depths.
Out of the depths. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Thank you for being here. Let me pray for us and we'll go. Oh God, we do come tonight and we ask you to hear us. Hear the cries that come out of the depths of our lives. Those places where we're hurting, those places where we feel disconnected, those places where we have deep, deep questions. Hear us. Tune your ear to us. And help us to see. Help us to see where you are present and what you are doing. Help us to hear your voice speaking into those moments. And God, help us as we try to train ourselves to see your presence. To learn how you are at work in our lives and in the world around us. So go with us. For it's in Christ's name.